little surprised to see you among the guest lists at the show. This doesn't seem quite like your speed generally.
Well, I don't know if you're aware, but I've now in the graphic novel business.
Yeah.
So, but in addition to which, it's the Harvey Awards. Harvey Kurtzman.
Yeah.
I knew Harvey before he was Harvey Kurtzman. So he used to come up to Will Eisner's office when I was Eisner's assistant. We'd hang out together. Years when he was still doing Hey Look, and years before Mad Magazine. So Harvey and I went way back, and I was a fan of his and a friend of his for many, many years.
It's interesting, to see who become the really sort of celebrated figures in the field. Eisner.
I'm having trouble here.
Oh, sorry. Close. Yeah, of course.
I'm pretty deaf.
Yeah. I was just saying, it's you mentioned Kurtzman and Eisner in one breath.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see who ends up kind of becoming the celebrated figures over the years. I mean, those are
and that Will is being honored. At this Harvey celebration. Yeah.
It seems like he's always being honored.
So it's when I worked for Eisner, which was 1947, 1948 or so, when he resumed doing The Spirit after the war, and it was, in terms of the graphics and often in terms of the story, the best of the years of The Spirit. It was a magnet for up-and-coming cartoonists. They wanted to. It was more exciting, more original, more unique stuff was going on than anywhere else in the business. So they would all gravitate to Eisner's, and I worked for Eisner, so I met them all and became friends with some of them. And Harvey notably among them.
There seemed to be, not easy, but it seemed to be pretty within reach in those days to start working with a big name artist and then kind of work your way up through the book. I mean, sounds like relatively quickly you were doing the front page, the front of the book story. I
didn't hear that.
Oh, it seemed like back then it was a pretty clear path to kind of apprentice or intern with somebody, and then you slowly started taking over a lot of the writing for the book.
Well, it was less a progression than finding something that I was capable of doing, because the artwork, which I had great ambitions about, turned out I was inept at, and could not develop that style, could not use a brush the way everybody else seemed to be able to. Anytime I was near any artwork, I screwed it up. Eisner was endlessly patient. So. But at the same time, I noticed that he was paying less and less attention to story, because he was spreading out, and he was doing magazine stuff and starting magazines, and he had a fishing magazine called American Angler. Exactly what he knew about fishing, I don't know. And he had some other things, and he did, and he was starting to do stuff for the military, and extending his Joe Doe cartoons, and a PS, a public service magazine. So while the artwork of The Spirit remained great, Will was kind of batting out the stories. He didn't have time, and I began writing them, and he liked what I wrote, and I wrote most of them for the 2 remaining years I worked for him, and would lay them out, and we would go over them and edit them, and it was a very collegial and wonderful experience, and really launched me in the direction I later moved, which was toward narrative cartoons.
Was there any resentment at the time that your name wasn't on it at all? That it was really just a Will Eisner?
Cartoonists had ghosts. They had assistants. It's and I was no more than an apprentice. I mean, I would have been shocked if my name was on it. My name shouldn't have been on it, but. When I asked him for a raise and he said I wasn't worth it to him, he gave me the back page, and then I started this kid strip called Clifford with my name on it.
Yeah.
And Eisner was very generous about it. He thought it was terrific. And when I look over the old ones, I'm less certain about that. But it was You can see toward the closing days before I got drafted in 1951, I was moving in the direction that I was later going to start developing in the Village Voice.
Mm-hmm.
But it really was the last of my active involvement in the kind of comics that were reflected in comic books or comic strips. From that point on, post-draft, I moved in a whole new direction that was new to me and almost everybody else.
You considered yourself an artist before a storyteller when you first started?
No, I considered myself a cartoonist, which is words and pictures.
Yeah.
And the reason I got into the comics was because of words and. When I the first strip I fell in love with, or the first few were Al Capsule Labner, which was wonderfully written, and his even better strip I thought, Abby and Slats, which he wrote. What a great artist named Ray Van Buren drew. But these are great examples of the words and pictures to tell a story. And Milton Caniff's Terry and the Pirates, which was the most extraordinary and perfect use of words and pictures in the form. I mean, he and Eisner were the two best at doing this. So, and I loved the whole idea of telling a story in pictures, and that's what I've been doing my entire life, even when I went into theater.
So there was a little bit of frustration around not being able to quite draw within that style.
Not less frustration and absolute misery. But then I decided, well, I can't do this, so I got to do something else.
Yeah.
Or, I can't go on beating myself over the head to something I don't have a skill for. And oddly enough, 60, 70 years later, I developed the skill. And when at the age of 80, I wrote Kill My Mother and thought somebody else should draw it because I can't. The publisher insisted I try. And in the intervening years, somehow I had learned.
And what you learned early on, especially as you were moving toward the Village Voice strip, was how to draw in your own style. What your own visual style was like.
Oh, it took a long time. If you see the early voice stuff, it's about 2 months or so before I evolve at something that could be called a Feiffer style. The writing was all in place from the very beginning. I mean, it kept developing, kept getting better. But it was essentially what it was. The art I kept experimenting with. I could not find a style that visually worked with the text for a long time, and finally it just came about. You just keep doing it and doing it and doing it, and suddenly one day you know what works.
How would you define the Feiffer style?
Mostly through desperation and self-loathing.
If you were describing it to somebody, though, the actual visual language, it's
well, I mean, they were all. When I was doing strips, when my ambition was comics, the people I looked to for guidance were Eisner and Caniff.
Yeah.
When I switched to satire and adult themes and politics in narrative form, the models I was looking at were Saul Steinberg and William Steig's later stuff, and Andre Francois and Robert Osborne. There were a whole bunch of artists experimenting in editorial forms, all very different styles, and I picked up from all of them.
Yeah.
I liked all of them, and I kind of drew like one day and the other the next day until it kind of gave me a style of my own.
What is it about that style, though, that works specifically with the satire, with the strips versus the spirit?
It's hard to be specific, but I knew very well that when I wanted to do a satiric strip, using a newspaper comic style, even as satirical as, say, as Walt Kelly, was not going to work. That was not appropriate for it.
Yeah, he was still a little more sort of polished toward the Eisner end.
It had to be more linear, more simple. What I understood from the beginning is because the text I was using in the Feiffer strip which originally was called 666 in the Village Voice. The text was so dense and complicated, and the story I was telling in 6 panels or 8 panels was somewhat demanding of the reader, so the visual style could not be demanding as well. Otherwise, nobody would bother. And in addition, I could not have the art deflect from the dialogue. The copy had to be the main thing, and it had to seduce the reader from panel to panel. And part of that seduction was to arrive at a graphic style that was as simple and as inviting as possible and as minimalist as possible.
Is it actually simple? Is it actually...
No, of course not. It's never simple. I mean, for me, the model from the beginning, as he always has been, was Fred Astaire, who looks simple and looks easy, and spends months rehearsing to make that look easy.
Yeah.
And so I was using that as a model. You take something, you get something that's very difficult and complicated, and you find the simplest way of presenting it so that it doesn't look like you're doing anything at all.
How long would it take you to draw, 6, 7, 8 panel strip?
Oh, it would take several hours or maybe a day. Wow. It might take another day to write it.
Yeah.
The day before, 2 days before. I found, as far as the voice strips went, that if I could have 2 or 3 days after writing it, before drawing it, it would help, because I'd do something that I thought was a work of genius one day, I'd look at it the next day and it was a piece of crap. So if you go, and anybody who writes knows that. So if you have to write it and turn it out at the same time and get it out that day, if you're lucky, it'll be okay.
Yeah.
But more times than not, when you see it in print, there's a lot more you wanted to do with it that you didn't have the time to do. So I tried as best I could to get the writing done, the script done, a day or two before I drew it and sent it in. And because it was a weekly strip, that wasn't always difficult.
I've gotten to a point in my life as a writer where I need those deadlines, where I need something approaching in order to get it out. I mean, if anything, I feel like deadlines are kind of helping me at this point. I get a little precious and spend a little bit too much time on something, and
I agree, but then it's nice to take a second look at it and do some editing.
Yeah. Are you... So when you get really down, when you get down to it, when you look at a strip like that, and all things considered, there's not that many lines. So what takes the time? Is it the redrawing? Are you drawing the same panel over and over again?
Again, it's all about storytelling.
Yeah.
Is the expression right? Is the mood right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the body language right? Is it often as not the way I drew? The first shot at it would be better than the second or third attempts, because it had a freshness to it.
Yeah.
If I kept working it over, it got stale. So at a certain point, when they developed photocopies, I gave up penciling entirely, and I just started drawing in ink on individual sheets of paper. And when I had 6 or 8 panels that told the story, I cut them out and paste them in.
There's a little bit of irony there of you finally hitting the spontaneity of the freshness on the third or fourth try, right? Of keeping it, making it look like something you've just drawn. But
it's all illusion.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole form, and I've said this often about all the forms I work in, particularly theater. It's sleight of hand. You take the reader or the audience down one path and to get them to think you're doing one thing, and you're really doing something else, and they don't find that out until the end.
Is it easier to work on something shorter? I mean, you've done these plays, you've done books, you released the graphic novel this year. Do you prefer working short form?
No, I love the long form.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm having more fun doing these graphic novels. Not today, actually. I'm struggling over the third book. The first book came out, as you know. The second book is coming out next June or July, and it's been turned in about a month ago. And now I have to wrap up the 2 books and put all the loose ends together and tell a whole new story. And I'm having a hell of a difficult time doing that. So it's and at the same time, it's great fun to try to figure it out, this puzzle. and the complicated stories. Once I started working in long forms, and it began really with my first play, Little Murders, it's what I preferred. Getting as much as I love doing 6 or 8 panels, you can't develop a relationship, you can't develop complicated thing. It's got to be a quick shot in and out. And I love that form, and often it's quite satisfying to get certain things said, particularly political or relationship statements. But in terms of storytelling, and I love storytelling, there's nothing like the longer form. And I adore it.
How long did the voice strip run, all told?
I ran it. It was 40 years.
40 years.
Yeah. And then 42 years in syndication.
Was it? Was it about just doing a lot of different things at once? Was it about kind of keeping your brain interested, or was it just nice having that steady paycheck? What kept you doing that strip for so long?
Well, what stopped it was they fired me.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the answer to the other question.
That's one way of getting out of the business. And
but you could have fired yourself a lot earlier.
Well, I actually had looked for other papers to get into, but nobody wanted me but the Voice. Nobody would do that kind of strip, except for the Village Voice, and pay me what they were paying me, which was considerable after all of those years, after 40 years. So the combination of needing the paycheck, I had at the time 2 children, a third on the way, and living in the most expensive city in the Western world. When I started at The Voice in late 50s and 60s and started in syndication, in the 60s I was making $40,000 a year at my work, and it was enough to buy me an apartment on Riverside Drive, buy me a house on Martha's Vineyard, and take me to Europe a couple of times a year and start a family.
I think that's minimum wage now.
By the time I got fired by The Voice, $40,000 was petty.
Yeah.
That's what it costs to find a room for your car and a lot.
Did it start? Did it ever start slipping into the background? Did you ever kind of lose focus on it as you were focused on all these other projects?
I was always a creature of what I was obsessed with at that moment, and I was very interested in theater at the time. And if I got on a play, that became everything to me. And I stopped that for a day and a half to turn out the week strip. But my mind was always on the play, and if it was a book, it was the same thing. Back and forth. When I got into kids' books, that became a new obsession. I love, because I was a new father at the time, and I loved telling these kids' stories, both in terms of novels. Like the first of the book, The Man in the Ceiling, about a boy cartoonist, which was a novel, and that came out in 1994. I was just out in California for tryouts of a musical version of it for Broadway, which we'll be doing in the next year or two on Broadway. And it met with great success. So that's very exciting.
Do the other projects start to suffer, though, when you're working on something new?
No, I've always done balancing acts, and I don't let anything suffer. It's not that because if I have to do it badly, I don't do it.
Yeah. I'm so curious how you manage your time, how you're able to do all of these different things.
Sloppily, but it's all obsession. Also, if you love the exercise and love the work, and while it is a job, it's really a plaything. It's a form of play. And my hobby, I don't do sports.
Yeah.
I have no hobbies. I have no skills outside of the one thing I do have. I have no sense of direction. I can't find my way around the block. What I can do is write and draw cartoons and plays and other stuff. And so it's I glory in it. And one of the great glories is to return, in terms of the graphic novel, to the adventure strip form, which was my first love. Along with Kniff, it was Roy Crane and Wash Tubbs and Captain Easy, you know, those early adventure strips. A wonderful cartoonist named George Storm, who nobody remembers.
I don't know. I'm sad to say I don't.
Well, these are, you know, I'm talking about the 30s and
Sure.
40s, slightly before your time.
Yeah, a little bit.
But these are guys I remember today as clearly as I did when I first saw them.
Was doing so many distinct things, was that by design? You know, was doing animation, was doing the plays. Did you just want to try your hand at as many things as possible?
No, it was a way of making a living. I was never particularly interested in animation, and I don't watch animation. I've never seen. I never watched The Simpsons, which I'm sure is very good. And South Park, I've tried to. What is it?
South Park, yeah, that's right.
I try to watch. I don't get it at all.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't seem funny or interesting to me. Animation bores me.
Yeah.
It's
that's surprising.
The dramatic form I like because people act, and when they act, you see them reacting to each other. Cartoon characters can't really react; they overreact.
Sure.
And I like nuance. I like subtlety. I like body language. I like all those things that real actors can do, and cartoons can't do.
It's funny though; it feels like sort of a happy in between, you know, the stage and
in
comics.
the graphic novel, I've learned a way of defining that body language graphically, so that there's somewhat of the illusion of a film or a play. But that's because I've been a playwright for years, and I know, having seen the work staged and worked with some brilliant directors. What's expected and what to shoot for.
I don't. When I think of live theater, I don't tend to think of subtlety. I do tend to think of sort of large reactions because you're acting for, you know, in a lot of, if it's Broadway, you're acting for a large audience.
Well, because you've seen lousy plays.
Okay.
Well, lousy productions. Yeah. You know, there are in good theater. It's amazing what they can get out of very little. If you see Hamilton, which is this huge. Hit on Broadway, and the producer of Hamilton is directing my play, The Man in the Ceiling. It's full of subtlety and nuance and remarkable stuff.
Yeah. How do you translate subtlety into comics? How do you not overreact with your characters?
Well, it's the way it's always been done. God knows I didn't start this, but if you watch Kniff's work when he was telling a story, he had a major character of his, Raven Sherman, get killed by being thrown off a truck in China. And he has a Sunday strip of the two heroes who pick her up and bury her and then walk down the mountain cliff and then look back and they talk and then they can't have anything to say and then they sit and then they fall asleep. And that's all done in 12 panels, and it feels like 200 pages. And very little is said, and only in the shots, long shot, medium shot, angles, the color, the way color is used at play with the figures. The artist, in this case Kniff, is directing the reader's eye in how fast or slow that reader looks at the work, and if you're in a fist fight, the eye moves fast, and if it's this, the eye moves very slowly. He goes over it. It's wonderful when when simply 12 lousy panels on a page in color can take 8 to 10 minutes to go over.
Yeah,
and that's because that's what the cartoonist decided he wanted to do with you. And if he's really good at it, no one was better at this craft than Kniff. He can manipulate the reader.
You, in a sense, though, you're working with fewer tools at your disposal. If you're working with fewer lines, if there's not color, it's that much more difficult to portray these things.
No, it's just a different set of challenges. If you're working in the form, you try to get inside the form. And in a sense, it's. Did you ever see the play Waiting for Godot? Do you know?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if you read Waiting for Godot, I remember the first time I read it. I thought, oh my God, it's a comic strip. I mean, the dialogue, he's coming. No, he's not coming. He'll be here. Yes, he'll be there. It read like E.C. Segar's Popeye, and yet it was so dense and had so much meaning. Well, nobody seems to be saying anything, and that's the trick. Beckett knew how to do it, and I studied Beckett to see if I could, to try to figure out how he did it, so I could convert it to a comic strip.
And then convert it back. How much did working on this regular strip inform your early plays?
Oh, I think everything did. Everything informed everything.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just the comic strips. It was going to theater, going to movies. The forms I was in love with from the time I was a little kid. I always loved film. I loved old-time radio, which was a dramatized form.
Yeah.
All these, while I was listening to the radio, when I was listening to The Adventures of Superman and Jack Armstrong and all of these shows, or the radio comedies, Jack Benny, I was learning my craft. I learned about comic timing from Jack Benny and Fred Allen. I learned how to, about pauses and silences from Janiff and Terry and the Pirates.
Interesting, because those when I think of those radio plays and movies, people speaking in mid-Atlantic accents, I think of kind of overly broad. But when you're starting to work on the strip, I mean, that's really kind of the time period where films are making that transition. That's when Brando is coming around and things are becoming a lot more realistic.
But there were also very subtle radio shows. I mean, the kids' afternoon shows were broad. They had to be.
Yeah.
But there were evening shows, dramatic shows, a great one called Suspense, a half hour of a thriller each week. That was written and directed like a half-hour movie with music cues that sounded like a movie. And it was amazingly visual coming through the radio, just amazingly dramatic. And I learned scads from that about dramatizing.
So Eisner goes off and is working on some of the wartime stuff. I think he did some tennis drawings at some point, and he does obviously eventually return back to comics. Really, in a lot of ways, helps pioneer the graphic novel as a form. Was it clear in those early days that he was really onto something? That was the start of something?
Oh, well, when he came back on the Spirit, which was I guess it was 1946 he returned. It seems like a long time, but I think it was 46. He was drawing in a different, much more realistic, and more, and the people he had helping him out, penciling and inking, were more realistic. It was a more realistic style, and the dramatization got much more cinematic, and much more, and the storytelling got better. I mean, he just had honed all of these skills to a sharper edge in his absence, and brought to it in finished form on those early Spirit pages in 46, 47, a completeness that he never had before, that he hinted at but never had before. And to get in on that at an early age, I was in my early 20s, was just thrilling, marvelous, and it was a wonderful apprenticeship.
But much later he starts working on Contract with God, some of these early graphic novels. Was that clear that was sort of an entirely new way of telling a story?
Well, by that time we had more or less lost contact. We'd gone off in different directions, and I don't think I was aware of Contract with God until it was out a year or so. I was simply involved in my own stuff by then, and so I was delighted that he had returned to comics, and I thought the work was brilliant, but it wasn't anything that I was paying particular attention to, except that I was very pleased for him.
But at what point do you start noticing these longer form comics, and at what point does it occur to you that that's something you want to try your hand at?
Well, it began at the time Will was doing Contract with God. I was at work on a novel in cartoons. I didn't call it a graphic novel. And it was done in a more or less traditional Feiffer style at the time, called Tantrum. because I was
Oh,
about
yeah,
to be
yeah.
50 years old.
Yeah.
And I had decided that I wanted to do a book in cartoons, a novel in cartoons by the time I was 50. So I came up with this idea and developed it, and I loved it, and it was successful. And I thought I would be doing a lot of these, and it was the last one I did. I mean, I never had another idea. And I was, in the business and out of the business with one book. And it was essentially old age that got me back into it. In my 50s, I had other things I wanted to do. I wanted to write for theater, and I wanted to do screenplays. But when I was 80 and couldn't move around that well anymore, and couldn't live in the city anymore because I couldn't hear and I couldn't walk, and my limitations took me out of the forms that I had been working in. It's hard to write for theater if you can't hear. Your actor's in a rehearsal.
Yeah.
And so I was living out in Long Island and fiddling around with stuff to do, and I started combining everything into the comic book. To do a graphic novel that involved me as a playwright, as a screenwriter, and eventually as a graphic artist, which was not the plan, but it turned out that way. So it takes everything I ever learned in my life and puts it into one form. And instead of moving around with actors, I could sit at my drawing board and boss them around.
It's interesting. I had read the book some time ago, and it doesn't even occur to me until you're saying this now that this is kind of a culmination of your life's work.
But none of it was planned. It just happened that way, and it happened. It happened. The reason I did the Feiffer strip in The Voice was out of my limitation, because I couldn't do an adventure strip. I couldn't work in the form that Eisner and Kniff did. I was no good at it. And the reason I ended up writing graphic novels is, again, the limitations of age. I was forced to think in new ways because I couldn't do what I had been doing.
But you never get frustrated to the point of just giving up and walking away from a project?
Oh, you always get frustrated. But I've been doing this forever, and I found out that if it's essentially a good idea, and if what I'm doing at the moment is rotten, if I just give it time, it'll come around. It'll guide me in the right direction. It has nothing to do with here.
Yeah.
It's got something to do with the gut, and giving it time and letting it mature, letting it come out when it wants to. It will surface. I just can't push it, and I can't bully it. All of those things are self-defeating.
Yeah.
So if I just learn to be patient and do other things and fool around or suck my thumb or just watch television, sooner or later it'll happen, and it'll turn out and it'll be good.
It might take 35 years in between one project and the next.
It may take, one play I did that way took 6 years to write.
Yeah.
And usually I had a first draft of a play in about 2 months. So, but I learned that if that I can't boss it around. It's the boss. Whatever it is, the process. And I'm basically the stenographer, or I'm the medium that delivers.
Channeling the muse.
And so, in a sense, I have very little to do with it. It decides when to use me and when not to.
Does it really feels like that? It really,
Yes. And I learned to trust it.
Yeah.
So that trusting it, however often I fail, I don't get frustrated, because I know that failure is part of the process. Fucking up is part of what.
Yeah.
Fucking up is what you need to be good.
Do you have any just completely dry creative spells? Any point when you're not producing anything?
All the time, and then I just leave it alone and read and watch, and I mean, just.
But does anyone jump out? What was your longest period without actually creating anything?
Oh, it might have been a year or so.
Wow.
I mean, something comes along.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, when I was doing the strip, even when I was dry creatively, I had to turn out a strip every week.
Yeah.
But there was stuff out there that I could comment on. I mean, essentially, I had the Cold War for many years as a subject matter. I had Vietnam as a subject matter. I had civil rights. I had all that stuff that everybody else was afraid to touch.
Yeah.
And I could jump into it.
And that never really stops, though. There's always some sort of social unrest out there to talk about.
Well, yes, but it does stop for me because now it has. Because what I see is, instead of going forward, you see it in Donald Trump. We're going back to trying to be a country that we were before the New Deal, before the 1930s.
Yeah.
I mean, that the right-wing Republicans basically idealize America when it was only white, when they had a rural fantasy, even when the rural thing had begun to fail, when everything was fantasized and idealized as individualism, even when there were no unions. I mean, the reason that people got a living wage in the first place was because unions under the New Deal began to have power. Without that, people would still be making 25 cents an hour. So all of those things that made us strong and made us a middle class, that gave us the first middle class in the history of the world, have started to backtrack, and that middle class is now disappearing. Unions are disappearing in terms of their power, and all of the things that made this society work is having a hard time surviving. I'm not willing to go back into that struggle and fight it all over again. I did that one time. So I'm leaving that to others, and I'm just, I mean, that the third book of the Kill My Mother series obliquely touches on all of this, but how obliquely and how directly and how successfully depends on what happens in the next 3 months of writing, and I'm not in charge of that.
When you do something for 40 years, when you're doing it weekly for 40 years, I've got to imagine, you're sitting down and you're watching CNN, or, you see Donald Trump on television, and the idea for one of these pops in your head. You must go back to that mode every once in a while.
No, I don't.
Really? You've turned it off?
No, it's not that I turned it off, but how can I do better than Jon Stewart on The Daily Show?
Sure.
I mean, and there's so many good people around.
Yeah.
When I started doing my stuff, nobody was doing this, and so I was all alone. And then Mike Nichols and Elaine May came along, and then Lenny Bruce came along, and and it was great to have allies and colleagues. But there still were not a lot of people. Now there are quite a few, and they're brilliant.
Yeah.
And there's no reason for me to compete with them, and I don't doubt if I could.
Do you feel that you're given the credit that you deserve for being in there early, for being a pioneer of that sort of satire?
I've gotten plenty of credit.
You're doing all right.
I've gotten plenty of credit. I have no quarrels with.
Do you, and I've been thinking about this. With respect to the biography that came out earlier this year, are you somebody who looks back a lot? Do you reflect on your work a lot?
Only when these books come out. I mean, when Out of Line came out, I was thrilled, and I couldn't leave it alone. I kept going and poring over it, and only when these lively, ongoing obituaries come out that then I get obsessed with my past.
Yeah.
But mostly, I'm thinking about what I'm doing next.
Yeah. It seemed like a big undertaking to do not just one graphic novel, but you saw it as being a trilogy from the beginning.
But it's yes, it's big if you think of it in toto.
Yeah.
But if you're just doing it and it's work you love, it's a day's work. That's all.
Yeah.
And it makes certain demands, but it's demands that they've always been made. Are the characters real? Am I writing, giving too much away? How do I get to be less direct? And without becoming obscure? How do I tell the story better? Who's the focus on this page? Is it on the person speaking the dialogue, or is it on the person reacting and listening? Those are the problems that a director in a play or in a movie has, and I'm the director of this movie, of this comic strip.
It's always the best and the worst part about being a cartoonist, being somebody who does every aspect of the process, is you can't blame it on anybody else.
And it's more fun. I mean, think of the power you have.
Yeah.
I cast all the actors, and I am all the actors at the same time.
But if it's bad, you're the only one. You're the only one who can take the blame.
I draw a character who I haven't fully personalized yet.
Yeah.
I look at him and I say thank you very much. Next, and the next one comes.
Yeah.
It's like actors auditioning.
Yeah.
Until the right one comes along, and I say you got the job, and it's enormous fun.
It's as we said earlier. It's a culmination of everything you've done. Do you feel that it's also the best thing that you've done?
Oh, I always think it's the best thing.
You think the last thing is always the best thing?
Yes.
Is there anything Is there anything you look back on that maybe wasn't quite up to that standard? That maybe wasn't your best thing?
Oh, there were plays that didn't quite work.
Yeah.
But at the time we did them, I loved them.
Yeah.
And a lot of my plays were not successful in terms of critics, but I think they were still wonderful pieces of work that I admire, and very happy I did. Little Murders, which is still around, was a Broadway flop when it opened. And they tried to bury it. Came back, and it kept coming back.
Yeah.
And Hollywood hated Carnal Knowledge and tried to forget it for years afterwards. So the year Carnal Knowledge came out, it was the Motion Picture Academy ignored it completely, except for nominating Anne Margaret, who was one of their own. And yet that movie still has resonance. Well, the movies that won awards that year, nobody can remember.
Yeah. The one that has always had a special place in my heart, and a lot of this has to do with my age, but the first thing of yours I was ever exposed to was Popeye.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you have a fond memory of working on that as well?
No, because Robert Altman, who was a friend, was also very difficult to work with. And I think there's some wonderful stuff in the film, but I did that as an homage to E.C. Segar, and it got a little lost in the telling.
Yeah.
Although Segar's daughter loved the movie. Yeah. She called me up to tell me that she thought it honored her father, and I started to cry because that's what I wanted to do.
It seems like most of your work, and certainly the sort of the more prominent things, are pieces that you've worked on your own. These obviously a screenplay turns into a play. Other people are working on it, but you're sitting alone. You're working on it. This new book, the graphic novel trilogy you worked on yourself. But do you enjoy the collaboration, whether it be Popeye or the illustration work you did on Phantom Tollbooth?
Well, it all depends who you're working with. And the best creative partnership I had, either in theater or film, was with Mike Nichols, because we had similar takes on things.
Yeah.
And we fed each other. I mean, that he gave to me, I gave back to him. I learned an awful lot from him about how to make. I mean, the reason I can do these graphic novels now successfully is because what I learned from Nichols in transferring the script of Carnal Knowledge, which was originally a play, to film form. And he basically gave me, in the course of our work together, a series of tutorials on how to take dialogue off a stage and turn it into actable scenes and movable scenes, and it was a lesson, and new lessons I learned every day. And I don't think I could be doing this stuff now except for what I got from Mike.
Yeah, when I look at Mike Nichols and you, I think one of the things that you share is this, that you both made these seamless transitions from, the work he did with Elaine May is a very different career than the one he has now, and like you, he completely reinvented himself.
Well, it was different, but it wasn't. It's all. He once said to me, "It's all behavior, and it's all reaction," and that was wonderful to have him Suddenly I saw exactly what he meant and what he was doing, how people behave with each other, which means how they react physically with each other so you can see it, or how they will not give anything away so you can see that too.
Yeah.
And all of that tells you something that the words don't necessarily convey. It adds to the words, and that's what I mean by words and pictures.
And you're talking about almost a completely different way of looking at the world around you, of how you observe other people in normal life outside of the creation of art.
Well, but it's also how you... that's not quite true. You grew up in a family, and from the time you're a little kid, you know and begin to acknowledge to yourself the difference between what people say to you in your family, your parents or your siblings, and what they mean. And the difference between yes, that means yes, and yes, that means no, or yes, that means maybe. You begin to decode for yourself different modes of behavior and different ways of directing you, so that you can socialize yourself into this world. If not, you couldn't socialize. If everything, if every way you behave was simply to take what people said as gospel, you wouldn't get very far. So you know when to talk, you know when to react, you know when to shut up. That's all part of the socializing process. Otherwise, you get fired from every job within a day or two. That people don't mean what they say. I mean, that my entire comic strip with The Voice was all about the misuse of language, the abuse of language. It had more to do with the words people speak than drawings, and how we do that in families, and how we do that in politics, and how we do that in workplaces, and everywhere in life, in sex. I love you, meaning go away from me, stop bothering me. It's that learning to decipher the codes that we all use on each other, and at the same time keep the code secret from everybody else. That's the fun of this, that exposing the code.
But he helped make you a little more conscious of that, of going out and seeing these things in the world.
And it was my my exposing these codes is what got me noticed in the first place and made me popular, and to stay popular over the years. I found, whether it's in the family, in sex, in politics, a way of decoding the conversation, the cover story, and exposing the cover story. And people would look at it and say, Jesus Christ, that's right, that's the way I think, but I never really expressed it. And you build up this fan base because people look to you to express what they were thinking, and they weren't quite sure that that's what they thought.
Is there an element of that in Kill My Mother?
I don't know. I think less so, because I was out to do something else in Kill My Mother.
Yeah.
But there, in the second book, Cousin Joseph, there's more of an element in that. In the third book, it will be still in the thriller category. It's more pure Feiffer of me doing subversive stuff, because that's the way it turns out.
Yeah. You're still having fun?
It's the best.
There you go. That was a great Jules Feiffer. I don't really know what is possibly left to say about Jules Feiffer, but a few weeks ago, when I did the conversation with Kinky Friedman, I was sitting around a table with a bunch of friends of his and some press people, and they were asking me to explain my podcast and other people that I had on the show, and I was kind of was racking my brain a little bit to try to come up with a few people that I think they might have heard of. I mentioned Don Leguizamo. I mentioned Eric Bogosian, who's going to be on an episode in the very near future. But like the vast majority of people who've been on lately have been a lot of cartooning folk, and I said, "Oh, are you familiar with Jules Feiffer?" And there was just sort of a pause, and everybody responded, of course we're familiar with Jules Feiffer. He's been a New York City institution for decades now. He did a strip for the Village Voice for about 40 years. He's been a playwright. He wrote Little Murders, which was turned into a film. Carnal Knowledge, has done all sorts of screenplays. He did Popeye with Robert Altman. He won the Academy Award for a cartoon that he did with an animated short he did with Gene Deitch. He's won the Pulitzer Prize. I mean, it was a silly question, but I guess you never really assume that's mixed company necessarily understand all the references you're putting out there. But it's astounding when you take a moment and look back at his career, look at all the things he's done. He's about as close to Renaissance man as I think exists in this day and age. I talked about this a little bit during the interview, but I have been familiar with his stuff for longer than I've had any idea who Jules Feiffer is. And the first time that I interviewed him, I never do this, but the first time that I interviewed him, I had a copy of the Phantom Tollbooth with me and had him sign that for me, because how often I didn't know how often I was if I'd ever actually encounter him again. Of course, I've interviewed him a few times since then. I spoke to him for Publishers Weekly a couple months ago when Kill My Mother, his first ever graphic novel, came out, and then this was at Baltimore Comic Con. We sat down in the lobby of his hotel to discuss that book and just to talk about his career. It was really it was a nice time for reflection, because he was there not only for that book, but he was also there to accept a few Harvey Awards, one on behalf of himself and one on behalf of Will Eisner, who is also being inducted. And he, of course, worked with Will Eisner early on in his career. Started apprenticing with him when he was about 16, and that kind of set in motion one of the most amazing and legendary cartooning careers of all time. So so glad we had the opportunity to do that. Thanks to the folks at Abrams for helping set that up. Thanks to Karen Green from Columbia for getting the ball rolling on that. Thanks to Brian for editing the show together. Thanks to everybody at the Boing Boing Podcast Network. If you like this show, many other fine shows you can check out over at boingboing.net or over at iTunes. And while you're over at iTunes, take the opportunity to rate the show if you liked what you heard. If you've got any feedback, it's riylcast@gmail.com. The Tumblr is the first and best place to get all of your RIYL related information. That is riylcast.tumblr.com. We've got a Facebook. You can like us over there. In the meantime, however, we'll be back just about this time next week with another episode of RIYL.